Podcasting is seriously one of the most underrated marketing platforms. People to this day are sleeping on it. People are spending their time on social media and blogs and doing whatever it is that they're doing. Meanwhile, podcasting is this beacon of hope. Seriously, it's a place where you can start off and have a wildly successful podcast without an audience, without an email list, without a following on social media. You just get to start and have an amazing podcast that grows your business, that grows your leadership, that does all the marketing for you. But if you have been hanging out with me for any length of time, you have heard me saying that podcasting for the sake of podcasting is not going to do anything for you. So today I'm going to break down my simple 5-step podcast growth formula to really help you harness the power of podcasting and grow your show, grow your income, grow your thought leadership. Let's do this. Number one thing for you to focus on to really grow your podcast is for you to focus on SEO. Now, if you're new around here, I talk a lot about SEO. And if you're not new around here, like you have heard me say so many times, but listen, here's the thing, SEO works. I talk about it because it works. So if you're not applying this to your podcast, or if you think you're applying this to your podcast and you're not seeing growth, guess what? You're not doing it correctly. So I have a ton of episodes, but specifically, if you go back and listen to episode 215 of my podcast, I break down why SEO, how to do it, all the things. Furthermore, because I'm super extra, I have a amazing resource for you, which is my free SEO crash course, which I go over how to do keyword research, where do keywords go, what are we looking for? Why are they important? So it's in depth. I go and I really talk about it so you can really understand how SEO works. But I promise you that if you think you're using keywords and you're not really seeing any big jump on your podcast in downloads and things are just like not moving for you, trust me when I say you think you might be doing keywords, but you're not. So go back, listen to episode 215, which I'll leave linked for you in the show notes. And also go ahead and grab my freebie so that you can go ahead and really harness the power of SEO. Number 2, you have to commit to being regular on your podcast. And I talk a lot about this on episode 251. But if you're not committing, if you're not being consistent, if you're not showing up once a week at a minimum on your podcast, then guess what? You're not going to see growth. I see a lot of podcasters that start a show and they're maybe committed for 3 months and then they stop and then they do an episode and then they stop again and then they'll do like 2 episodes and then they'll stop and the podcast is just not a priority. So instead of you focusing all your time and energy on other things like social media, which is so short-lived, focus on creating your podcast. You can literally sit down and batch an entire month of your podcast in one sitting and have content for the entire month for your podcast. And then from there, you're recycling the content from your podcast into social media. Like, listen, you don't have to give up social media, but make your podcast the cornerstone of your marketing. Make it the main thing and then recycle content from there. So instead of you showing up and creating content for all the different platforms and having your podcast be the second thought, flip that around, focus on your podcast because it's the one thing that you actually have control over. And I just want to sidebar here for a second and say that if you have never been logged out of Instagram or TikTok or LinkedIn or whatever platform, I know that you know a friend who has lost their Facebook, their Instagram, and whatever. So it's very possible. But how many people do you know have ever lost access to their podcast? So it pays for you to make the podcast the main thing, because I don't know of anybody, with the exception of like Alex Jones, who has ever been booted off of the podcast platform. And to this day, by the way, as far as I know, he has a podcast. I don't know. I don't watch him. I don't know where he hosts his podcast. I don't know anything about Alex Jones other than he's gotten kicked off the Apple platform. And I believe he's the only person to date who ever has been. I'm not sure if there are any other people, but the point is, you have to be like super next level for you to get locked out of, the podcasting platform. Whereas on social media, anything can trigger the algorithm and it's impossible for you to get a hold of a human being. And that's it. All your work and the sweat and blood and tears that you put into this thing is gone literally overnight. So commit to the podcast and show up consistently, at least once a week. And honestly, if once a week is all you can give, Once a week is what I do for my podcast, and I have done it all. I have done stretches of time where I've done a podcast a day, Monday through Friday. I have done 3 times a week. I've done 2 times a week. I've done once a week. And guess what? Once a week works really great for me. I'll have another episode coming on that at a future date. But for now, just be consistent on your podcast. This third step to a wildly successful podcast is for you to focus on short episodes. Now, I talk a lot about this on episode 353, again, linked for you down below so that you can go back and listen and understand why short episodes work. I don't want to repeat myself if you are a loyal listener. But the point is, you may think that you need a 45-minute episode or a 1-hour episode, even like a 30-minute episode. And a lot of times you will find that if you go and look into your analytics, those episodes are actually not performing really well. People are dropping off. People are not as engaged. Whereas when you look at the shorter episodes, people can commit, right? So like if you think about your ideal listener, your ideal person who's listening to your podcast, let's just imagine that they may be taking their kid to school, they might be driving to a coffee shop, or they might be going for a morning walk, or they might be making the morning coffee, or whatever it is that they're doing. And you can pretty much count on a routine that's around 15 minutes long, around 20 minutes long. And that's, if you can plug your podcast episode in there, you can kind of envision where in the day is my listener actually going to listen to my podcast episode. And you can plug that in there in that allotted amount of time, right? Like somebody, like maybe you're catering to moms that are putting their makeup on in the morning, they're listening to your podcast episode, and it takes them, 15, 20 minutes to do their morning routine, whatever, right? Like if you can envision yourself and create that episode specifically for that person, then you can count that they're going to listen to your podcast from beginning to end. Whereas if you have a longer episode, listen, we only have so many hours during the day. And I guarantee you that you're not the only podcast, you're not the only piece of content that your ideal listener is listening to. So you have to make sure that you're a part of their day and that they can commit to you without interruptions, or at least with as little interruptions as possible. So focusing on those short episodes is the way to go. The fourth step in order for you to grow this amazingly successful podcast is for you to focus on getting reviews, specifically on Apple Podcasts. So even if you don't have like an Apple device, maybe you are an Android kind of person, it's okay. Just focus on getting those reviews over on Apple because they really do help. And you will hear from every other person who's a podcast coach, who's a podcast strategist, that reviews don't help, that reviews don't matter, the reviews don't this. And let me tell you something. As somebody who owns a podcast management agency and somebody who looks at so many podcasts every single month, I can tell you right now that the podcasts that have more reviews, they do better. So focus on getting those reviews because they really are going to make a difference. Now, I have an entire episode 269. Go back and listen to that episode because I completely understand that getting reviews is not the easiest thing. You have to kind of pull teeth sometimes, and it's not the easiest thing. But on episode 269, I give you a bunch of tips, a bunch of hacks that you can implement in order for you to get those reviews on your podcast. So go back and listen to that episode. The fifth step is for you to be strategic and for you to look at your data in your analytics, because guess what? Creating episodes out of thin air and out of your feelings and just kind of being in the flow, it's not really going to help you, right? So we have all this data from our podcast, and instead of trying to think outside the box and kind of wonder what works, what doesn't, what's going to land, go back and look at your data and optimize based on what you have, because what's working now is a good indicator that it's going to work in the future. So if you have a podcast episode that is doing really well, go ahead and let's capitalize on that theme and make more of those episodes. And I talk in depth about this in episode 343, so you can really understand how data and analytics work to your benefit, so you can actually have a super successful podcast. Now, I do have a bonus tip here that I want to share with you. And honestly, this is the glue that holds everything together, which is this. Podcasting is amazing. Podcasting works. But if you're not committing to this, right? Like if you're starting your podcast and you don't have a long-term vision and you think that you're just going to start a podcast today and it's going to go viral tomorrow, and then like all the people are going to be knocking your virtual door to come work with you, listen, that's probably not going to happen. It could happen, right? Like anything's possible with God. However, commit to showing up for at least 1 year. Give it a fair shot, because so many people start, they go out, they buy the microphone and they get the studio and they get all the crazy things and they go all out, and then they put in the energy in launching their podcast. And then when they don't see whatever idea they had on ROI, then they quit, and that doesn't do anything for you. So commit to your podcast, commit to showing up for at least 1 year. I have been podcasting since May of 2020, and my podcast started with me launching to an audience of nobody to now being a top 0.5% podcast. I'm not a household name. I'm not anything special. I'm not an Amy Porterfield or a Jenna Kutcher, or I am not. I'm just a mom of 2 kids, pregnant with my 3rd, just doing my thing here in the podcast world. And I have a successful business because of it. And the point I'm trying to make is, as cliche as it sounds, is that if it's possible for me, it's absolutely possible for you. Because while I am an amazing person getting it right with the podcast and doing things correctly, there are many other areas of my business that need help. For example, email marketing, not my thing. I'm just going to be super honest that I could be 100 times better at my email marketing strategy right now. And it's not, right? But my forte is podcasting. It's what I focus all my energy on, and I have a successful business. So I can tell you right now that this does work, but you have to do the thing and you have to commit to it. Now, in the next episode, if you're not subscribed, make sure that you're subscribed because you don't want to miss it. In the next episode, I am going to go granular, and I'm going to be talking about show notes, because I see this again and again with so many people that are doing their show notes wrong. So while this episode today was very bird's eye view, next week we're going to go granular. So make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss this huge opportunity to actually capitalize on our show notes. Until next time, may you find God's love, grace, mercy, and peace, and I'll see you then. Bye.